Welcome to our fourth coffee break on digital learning. You can also grab a coffee or a beverage of your choice and just sit back for the next 30 minutes. In the last episode, we talked about the impact of Corona on international collaboration and exchange. And in today's discussion, we will talk about new business models in higher ed. Just a couple of words of introduction about us and this format in general. My name is Anne. I work for the Global Learning Council, which is a think tank of thought leaders in the area of digital education. I've prepared some questions for our two panelists, which we will discuss for about 20 minutes. And then everyone can also, meanwhile, leave their questions in the Q&A box, which you'll find on the screen below. And then for the last 10 minutes, my colleague will pop in and pose some of these questions to the panelists. Now to briefly introduce our two guests today, first we have Renata Suter from Kiron Open Higher Education. She's Chief Education Officer. Kiron is formerly known as Kiron University. It is a social startup based in Berlin, and it provides free learning opportunities for refugees worldwide and to underserved communities in the Middle East. And then we have Andy Rosen. He is the CEO of Kaplan, Inc., which provides educational services to both colleges and universities and corporations and businesses. And Andy has also authored a book on higher education, specifically in the United States. And he's also a member of the Global Learning Council. The first question I want to start with, maybe Andy, I can start with you. Can you talk to us a little bit about the prevalent business model in the higher education landscape in the United States?
Well, that's actually a harder question than it appears, because the higher ed system in the United States is very diverse, all kinds of institutions. And so your question is actually a little like if you ask, what's the business model for restaurants? Mm-hmm. You'd say, well, you know, there's a business model for food trucks, and there's a business model for bodegas, and there's a business model for sit-down restaurants or chains or, you know, fancy French restaurants. But, you know, each of them has a different mix of sort of price, convenience, quality, you know, how much they spend on their real estate. And so, I mean, I think the U.S. is what I think people don't always appreciate is the U.S. higher ed system is not a system. It is an assortment of 4,300 independent institutions, each of which acts in its own interest. And the federal government actually plays, other than some funding, plays very little role in governing those institutions. Mm-hmm. But there are public institutions and private institutions, for-profit and non-profit, religious and secular, mm-hmm. Suburban, urban, rural, mm-hmm. Very small, 200-300 students, up to, you know, 60, 70,000. And when you include online, hundreds of thousands of institutions. And so the business models are very, very different across institutions. One thing that is characteristic of almost all institutions, though, is they tend to be tuition dependent. That is, that's not to say that their sole or even primary revenue stream is tuition, but there are very few institutions in the United States that aren't dependent, at least to some significant degree, on tuition. The government, there's been talk within the U.S. about going to free education, free higher ed. But right now, that is mostly talk across the United States. Tuition is still really important. Mm-hmm. So let me start there. We could probably mm-hmm. come back to that.
Interesting question. To have that diversity in there that maybe from the outside we're not always aware of. Renata, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about Kiron Open Higher Education, how that fits into the German education landscape, and then maybe also you have a few words also on the German education landscape for those who aren't German watching this.
Sure. So yeah, Kiron, I think as you already introduced it, and as it's most known, is or how we started also in 2015 when Kiron actually was funded, is that we are providing a bridge program for refugees that would like to go to university, to a German university in this case. We also have this offer in Lebanon and in Jordan, where we also have offices. And we provide preparation courses, language courses, transfer checklists, support in all these things to these refugees, such that they can then hopefully successfully apply at a university and transfer to a university to get a degree there. Before you said that we're also once known as Kiron University. We are of course not a university. We are an education provider, if you want to say so. But in the beginning, that was kind of like the term that we were known for. In the last years, we actually also broadened our offer to our students a lot. And this is also interesting, maybe in the discussion about higher education institutions and their business models. We've seen that lots of our students already have a degree, and they use our offers also more as lifelong learners. They use it as certificate programs. And we therefore these days also have a lot of offers for lifelong learners, for students that are more interested in upskilling in a certain way. And this is kind of like the core learning platform, the Kiron campus, as we call it. But then we also have other products for other target groups. And I would like to mention two that are connected to the higher education landscape in Germany. On the one hand, we are part of one of the European university initiatives, the UFE Alliance. This is the Young Universities for the Future of Europe Alliance. And together with the University of Bremen, we are the German partners in this European alliance. So this is an alliance with the goal to establish one of the first true European universities. And here we have a European student body in mind. So this is an alliance that started last summer with the European University initiatives. And it's just the start, I think, of a very interesting new development in the European higher education sphere. And the third one that I would like to mention is a collaboration with, under the lead of the German Academic Exchange Service, the DAAD. And this is together with a consortium of partners that includes universities, but also language providers. And what we started this year is to build a digital campus for international students that are interested in studying in Germany. And this digital campus will provide them with all the resources, all the information that they need to best prepare themselves already in their home country for their studies in Germany. And especially in the days of Corona, of course, this is a very interesting project as well. So these are three different learning environments for three different student groups, but as you can maybe guess, these students also share a lot of their goals and needs, such as, for instance, an engaging digital learning experience. And yeah, so that's maybe about three of three projects, three programs that that Kiron does in the that are connected to higher education in Germany. Maybe something about higher education in Germany as well, especially as we've heard already from Andy about the big diversity that you have in the US. I think a huge difference is that in Germany there are no student fees, so the system works very differently. Also, when we look, of course, at business models, most higher education institutions are also state funded. So I think with the difference, maybe also when we talk about Corona and the effects that it has on the higher education landscape in Germany, it was also a huge change, but not so much in that that institutions are looking in how to adapt their business models as we've seen that in the US. I think there is really a difference due to the funding structure of the institutions here. But maybe I would say that there is still now new opportunities for business models, for new funding streams for universities that have not been that prominently discussed before.
And did you want to say something to Renata?
Well, I just was wondering, the programs for refugees, those are all, the preparation to go to a German university, it's all online, is that right?
Yes. So in Germany, in the beginning, we also had blended courses. Now it's all online. We are an international platform, so we have students from all over the world, actually. Maybe I can say something about that also afterwards, because I guess we are also talking about the challenges at one point, but we have blended project offers in Lebanon and Jordan.
Got it. Yeah, just, I mean, obviously the challenges of delivering online programs to a refugee population, I'm sure not small. I don't know if we'll get to that, but that sounds interesting to me.
So the next question that I have talks about the fact that digital learning has been around for a couple of years, and this has, of course, changed the education landscape that we have and the systems that are in place, and also maybe change some of the business models that were traditionally there to start out with. Andy, maybe how has digital learning affected businesses and business models around education?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of years, we at Kaplan started an online law school in 1998 and an online university in 2000. And so we've been at this for a long time, and it's actually a bit, I would say for the first 10 or 15 years of running online programs, the response was always withering that that's not education, that's an that is the antithesis of what a real education ought to be, until Stanford in 2011 started offering programs online, the first MOOCs. And there was an article in the New York Times, and the whole world celebrated Stanford inventing online learning in 2011, saying that this is the future of education. And which is a lot how higher education works, at least in the United States. If the cool kids are doing it, then everybody wants to do it. Until then, nobody wants to have anything to do with it. And but I think in the time since the MOOCs emerged, some universities have really been able to create a strong business model for digital learning. Arizona State, Southern New Hampshire University are examples of institutions, Liberty University, there's a number, University of Maryland, that have built significant online institutions. Purdue University acquired Kaplan University and is now a major player. And for those schools, they are extending their reach and increasing both their student counts and their revenue. And I would say their presence and prestige through an online, through a significant investment in online. Most universities in the United States now have some online offerings, but most of them are really designed to support their existing program. I think what is going to be most interesting going forward is now that essentially every university in the country, really most universities around the world, have become digital universities, whether they like it or not. They got dragged kicking and screaming into it. How does that change how people perceive online in the future? I think it changes things in a number of different ways. One, I think people got to see behind the curtain a little bit about what a college education is. Now, remember that at a top university in the United States, it might cost $75,000 a year. And these are 4-year degrees. So you're talking about close to $300,000 for a bachelor's degree in, in a number of top institutions, and then other institutions sort of operate under that umbrella and charge maybe $60,000 or $50,000 a year. When these classes, when people went home to their, high school bedroom and took classes via their computer, and the parents walked in and they saw a professor who look, you know, like the rest of us. You know, there's a dog barking and the doorbell ringing, and you know, a lonely picture, you know, of a kindergarten picture of their, you know, kid in the background. Like they said, wait a second, I'm paying $60,000 for this. And it starts to, the behind the curtain is a reference to, like, you know, in the Wonderful Wizard of Oz, the Wizard of Oz movie. I don't know if that's known around the world, but you know, the wizard was this great and powerful wizard with smoke and fire and so on, until you look behind the curtain and it was just a guy. And I think universities are facing the issue of, you know, when you're surrounded by ivy and by great buildings and statues and presentations and so on, the professors and the classes seem so great and maybe worth that $60,000. But in the end, you know, professors are like all of us, where they're human beings and smart human beings and committed human beings. But really what students are paying the $60,000 for is not the professors. The professors are not getting that money. It's building these resort environments that surround it. And I think that digital learning both opens the door to, you know, or look behind the curtain as to whether it's really worth it to do that. And at the same time, digital learning provides the opportunity for much less expensive education. So the education itself shouldn't really cost more than, say, $10,000 a year. And I think over time, we're going to get to high quality institutions that cost $10,000 total. And families are going to increasingly start to question whether they should be writing checks for $200,000 when they could get the same education, the same quality of education for, say, $25,000. And granted, their kids will not get the 4 years in a wonderful environment surrounded by other smart kids. They're going to give up something for sure. But parents are finding, you know, increasingly as prices go up, that it's not sustainable, and they just can't afford it. As much as they would like to send their kid to a traditional place-based university, they can't afford it. And I think digital is going to create some alternatives. And there are a lot of universities in the United States that that will have real struggles surviving in a world in which there are fewer students available to come. So as you work your way down the sort of rankings chain, the schools that are going to lose are the ones towards the bottom of that. And I think of the 4,200 or 4,300 schools that we have, a lot of them are at risk.
Thank you. That was good to hear that there's a shift going on in different ways, both from the push of the technology, but also the mindset and the way that people think about education and what are they paying for, what is the worth behind it, the value. So that's very interesting. Renata, at Kiron, all the learning takes place online. You don't have any of the or you said in the Middle Eastern communities, there's some that is blended, but primarily I think you started off with providing just online learning. Now, what are some of the challenges, opportunities that come with that also when you're missing that environment of having students maybe come together and interact and have that community around a university and around an academic setting? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. This is a very interesting question and also a broad one. I would maybe like to talk first a bit on digital learning and its challenges in general, and then how Kiron solves some of these issues, because I think they are the same for everyone that, or similar to everyone that provides digital online learning. On the one hand, online learning, of course, as has been mentioned already, is kind of like a means to democratize learning as well, to make high quality learning offers available to a much larger audience, also the ones maybe in the US, for instance, that cannot afford student fees. So also not only the elite groups. And this is surely the case, for instance, also for our Kiron's target group, the refugee students. So with digital learning, a non-traditional student group can maybe, or this can be open very high quality learning contents also to non-traditional learners. And this is not only refugees, but especially with high student fees, of course, also people that cannot afford it, or people that have a job or have children or sick relatives or other things. So there are a couple of reasons why students cannot afford to go several years to an offline university. So it provides much more flexibility as well. But on the other hand, and I see, as at least in Germany, this is discussed at the moment a lot when it comes to primary education, for instance, as well. There is the danger for a digital and also therefore an educational divide. And this is maybe what you already said about the refugee students, because we also deal a lot with this challenge. So in Germany, for instance, we know that there are teachers have a lot of problems to reach their students, especially of younger ages, because they don't have the devices or the bandwidth. And this is true in a lot of areas in the world. And for our students, they are all over the world. We have this challenge all the time as well, of course. And then there is, of course, also the challenge that is discussed a lot about maybe what most people know is the MOOC completion rates, or how successful is digital learning, how many courses are actually finished, how much can digital learning replace offline learning. And this is, of course, a very tricky debate, because there are a lot of different layers. On the one hand, if we look at MOOCs and people that are interested in taking these courses, we know that the debate is often that it's only 5 to 15% that actually also finish a course. But and we, of course, we are also asked this question about our completion rates the whole time. And I think it's a fair question, but we should also see that these are digital information, open resources, and none of us is reading a newspaper from top to bottom. I think in the digital world, it's also a sort of digital literacy, that we know how to gather information, how to find the information that we are looking for. And I don't know how many people in the audience have ever finished a MOOC, for instance, and how many have started it. I am one of the starters and scanners of MOOCs, for instance. I rarely finish them due to time issues, but I think it's a huge resource of information where we can select information from. So I think the debate maybe now, when a lot of universities go to fully online, will change a bit, because then these MOOCs are part of curricula and you need to finish them to get your credits. But in the whole debate about how successful is digital learning as well, I think we need to ask the right questions sometimes as well. Maybe about how we at Kiron try to solve some of these issues, because they are, of course, also ongoing. We have, our students are not the most privileged learners. They have for sure not the best circumstances. We know what kind of phones they use. Most of them use very old phones, and this is a challenge with digital learning. And to target some of these challenges that our target group has, for instance, and this is different for every target group, but we tried to build a learning platform that is very, very data scarce. So we have, as far as we know, one of the smallest learning apps that exists, from kind of like the space that it uses also on your mobile phone, because we know how little space our students have. We try to work as much as possible also on offline solutions. And we also know that also in Germany, for instance, there are large parts where there is not a lot of, or the access is not as great as it could be. So this is not only a refugee problem, but we have also worked a lot on creating an ecosystem around learning, because just providing courses doesn't mimic maybe the offline experience that you have as a student at university. And we've all been at university, and we know how important it was to have a student group to learn and to stay motivated. and to have discussions. So what we do at Kiron is that we create such an ecosystem with live tutorials, with student groups also in Jordan and Lebanon offline, blended learnings sessions, but also online. We have help desks, we have also things like psychological counseling that you also find at offline universities, but we tried a lot of different offers. We changed them a lot over the years, but I think we've been also with our very difficult target group, or difficult in a way that they face a lot of difficulties in their learning. We've become more and more successful. So we, for instance, over the last 3 years managed to have completion rates above 25%, which is really high compared to the normal 5 to 15. But I think it would not be possible without this ecosystem of offers that come around the learning offer that we provide. Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe I can jump in here. A few questions from the audience. Maybe I just summarize that because we are running out of time. There's one blog asking about business models and how they are challenged in the current pandemic crisis. Whether you see similarities between in how far business models are challenged throughout the globe, and given that there are differences on how they operate in the first place. That is the one aspect of the questions. And the second aspect is, where do you see the necessity of players from the business sector to actually help universities and higher education institutions in tackling the challenges they are facing right now?
Yeah, well, maybe I could kick off on at least, one or both of these. There's no question that business models are dramatically affected by the pandemic. In the U.S., almost every university suffered in the spring and again through the summer, which is where universities gain a lot of revenue. If the fall if students can't come back in the fall, there will be a lot of universities that can't make it, because most universities in the United States don't have the wherewithal to survive that long without a revenue stream. And even if they go online, students are increasingly indicating that they're not willing to pay the same amount of money for an online experience as they are for a place-to-place experience. And so you've got, as it is, several dynamics. One, a lot of students are considering not going back in the fall, regardless of whether it's holding, because they feel like it's not going to be the same, and they're not willing to spend the kind of money on a lesser experience. The fact that so schools may have fewer students coming. Those that do come may resist paying as much money as they've paid in the past, so that's going to lead to less revenue, all of which puts significant strains on the financials of a university. Just to be clear, this is not a problem of the elite universities. The elite universities have the capability, if students don't come, they just pick off students from a lower ranked university and say, congratulations, you're coming to Georgetown. And Georgetown will be completely filled. They don't have to worry. But then there's a school next on the list that says, oh boy, we're starting to lose some students, and they'll start picking off from the one below. But once you get to the second half of institutions, they don't have any place else to go. And those are the ones that are at significant risk. And so this was the case all along, but accentuated by the coronavirus. So I think that some disruption of the US higher education market that was likely to take place over the next decade or even 2 decades is going to happen over the next 5 years, particularly if the fall is significantly disrupted in anywhere close to the way the spring was. Before I get to the second, let me suggest that, Renata, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the situation in Germany is, of course, if I now refer to the German system, is of course very different, because we don't have the student fee dependency, and we have a little bit more stability for higher education institutions. So here I think there is still a huge shift in how much is provided digitally, and or how universities provide their offers digitally. But the financial stability is, I think, a totally different situation compared to the US.
I would say on that point, one of the things that we'll see how it plays out, but you got 40 million unemployed, newly unemployed people in the United States.
Yeah.
And so a lot of families that are currently sending their kid to college now have significant concerns about what their future holds. And a lot of economists are indicating that many of those jobs will not come back, even when the virus passes. And so will that lead to many fewer students going to college? Or there's some evidence from past economic downturns that leads to more students going to college, because while there's not as much opportunity cost to go into university, that is, there's not as many jobs out there that you could spend your time on, more students will come and go to school. And the US, to be clear, does provide grants and loans for students to go. So much of that has to be paid back, but students will have the wherewithal to go to university if they believe that will pay off for them in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Maybe because we're already so much out of time, maybe I can just wrap up with one last question. It is, how do you see the opportunities of a university for the long run, something like a Google University or a YouTube Academy, for the digital learning sector to come in and sort of take up a role of educator as well?
Well, we at Kaplan did a survey recently in which we asked parents, would you rather your child had an internship with Google or a degree from Harvard?
Uh-huh.
And the majority of parents said they prefer the internship at Google over a degree from Harvard, which is, that was a
saying something.
survey, but it tells you about about the strength of some of these tech brands. I do think that there's certainly a portion of Silicon Valley that thinks that you can simply automate a university education and deliver it at essentially zero marginal cost. Mm-hmm. I don't happen to be a believer in that. I think that the human interaction, faculty, matter in a university education, and there are some students who are probably capable of being completely self-motivated and self-taught, and they can just acquire the information through materials. Mm-hmm. I think the vast majority are going to need more than that. And so if a Google wanted to enter into the higher education world, they would need to bring people into the mix much more than they're used to. And I think that it's more likely that a Google would partner with a university that is visionary and very disciplined about how to run in a business-like manner, and get the benefits of what exists within a university rather than doing it on its own. But the general point, which is, can you substantially reduce the cost of education and make it accessible to people around the world who have previously not had access to the riches of higher education? I mean, they may have had access to sort of low-end, relatively low-quality education, but there is a possibility, and it will happen over the next 10 years, where you can have a low-priced, high-quality education that is available broadly. And I think that's going to be a fundamental change in not just education, but in our economies and in people's lives.
Renata, do you have just a last comment on that?
Yeah, I thought actually of we have an interesting model in Germany, also a dual studies program where you work and study at the same time. And I think especially when we look at all these big players that are now entering the education markets, that could also be kind of like a way to work together with universities, because there is, at least in Germany, there is such a model already where companies can support, maybe also to come back to the question from the audience.
I think we are out of time, so I think we're gonna just wrap it up here. If anyone from the audience would like to continue this conversation, follow us on Twitter, join us on Mattermost. And in the next episode, we will talk about equality in education, incidentally, with Rahim Rajan from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Satija Bashir from the World Bank. This will take place on Monday, June 15th, so in 2 weeks minus the 1 day. And we hope you can join us then. The link should be in the chat. It's at least on the website, and we hope to see you then. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.